Good afternoon, folks. East Coast time. Good morning, folks. West Coast. And good evening, good night times, India time, because we have viewers, audiences, and interaction from India also. Welcome to the Saturday noon hour, the Political LeaderSpeak Hour, hosted by the US India Political Action Committee and the Imagine India Institute. Every Saturday at 12 noon, we get together with folks from the Indian American community and various, of course, mainstream America or America, and of course, also Indian personalities at times to discuss on issues of interest to the Indian American community and the wider political, geostrategic, geopolitical audiences. It is our pleasure this week, of course, a most unusual, more historic week in American history to host a discussion with a distinguished panel of practitioners and scholars on the inauguration of President Joe Biden. Folks, this program is right now being broadcast live streamed on the US India Political Action Committee Facebook page and also on the Imagine India Facebook page. Please wave by, check by, put your comments and put your questions, and I'm sure our distinguished panel will be more than happy to answer or take in your questions. That said, it is my pleasure to welcome our distinguished panel for the day today. We have with us Commissioner Upendra Chivukula. Welcome, Commissioner Upendra. We have with us Professor Marjorie Hershey. Welcome, Professor, to the discussion hour. She's a Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Indiana. Thank you so much. We have also with us Professor Srinivas Parinandi. He is also a professor at Colorado in political science. Thank you, Professor, for joining. We had one more panelist with us, unfortunately, Aruna Miller, representative to the Maryland House of Delegates, former. Unfortunately, she could not join because she has a family medical emergency. So we send her our prayers and best wishes, please. Now, that said, the topic of the day today is to discuss on inauguration of the Joe Biden presidency, what it means, probably in the next 100 days and thereafter. So, in this opening round, I'll be inviting each of our distinguished panel to make their opening comments, analysis, perspective on what they feel are matters of concern, challenge, scope, opportunities, any which way they want to slice the dice or any which prism they want to look at it. And folks, once again, I'm requesting or suggesting any audiences who are watching on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, please feel free to give in your comments, likes. You cannot give dislikes. Sorry, Zuckerberg doesn't allow that. So whatever you can give and interact and give us questions so that we can take your questions also with our eminent panel. That said, may I now invite Commissioner Upendra Chivikula for his opening comments for about 2.5 minutes on the topic of the day, please.
Thank
Commissioner,
you.
USC Board of Public Utilities. Sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And it was what a day it was, January 20, 2021. We have finished up one nightmare and we started with so much of hope and such a leadership we are looking forward to from Biden administration and also historic moment in that Kamala Harris.
USC Board of Public Utilities. Sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And it was what a day it was, January 20, 2021. We have finished up one nightmare and we started with so much of hope. And we would like to see so much from Biden administration and Kamala Harris being the first woman of color, both African as well as Indian heritage. And she has done remarkably well. Her career is so amazing that it was first time in the history of the United States that a woman holding such a very high position. And having said that, Joe Biden as president has in his speech indicated that unity is the most important thing. He's faced with three different challenges. First, COVID-19 pandemic, then economy, the unemployment issues, and trying to bring the 30% of the people who have supported the previous president and to bring them along and also have the GOP to work with the Democratic Party towards the betterment of the country, I think as a nation, we need to stand out. We are the leading nation in the world, and whether it is environmental policy, whether it was healthcare issues, research and development, economy, and our military might, we are the leading country. So we like to see Biden administration to kindle that hope and bring everybody together, so that way we'll regain our leadership in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for your opening thoughts and comments. And I think, each one of the speakers will encapsulate in ways wherein we will dig down deeper into the next round of conversation. Thank you so much, sir. May I now invite Professor Marjorie Hershey, Professor Emeritus at the University of Colorado in Political Science, for your opening thoughts and comments. See, we have structured, we hope, this panel between practitioners and professors and leading thought leaders. So, whichever way you want to span, welcome, Professor. Sorry, University of Indiana.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's right. Did very well. The situation that we are currently in, it's unprecedented, and it's going to be very, very challenging for political figures to deal with. I think that the key to dealing with the issues that President Biden faces is getting the pandemic under control. Once that happens, God willing, then the economy will follow. The chances are that once we get people back to work, and once consumers out and buying things and getting the economy moving again, that will do a tremendous amount to solve a lot of the problems we have. But that's within the context of a level of party polarization that I'm sure my colleague from Colorado will want to talk about as well. We have an unprecedented within the past half century laying on of different types of identities on one another, so that now the party divergence between Republicans and Democrats as layered onto the racial divergence, to even gender divergence, to divergence in educational levels, so that these splits are much more clear and much more difficult to bridge than we've seen in the past. And that's we probably have got the best option in terms of presidential choices to deal with that, because of the fact that President Biden has had a very long history with members of the other party. But it's still going to be a very difficult challenge to deal with, and I'm sure that the previous president will give us no small source of continued stress with respect to demonizing the other side.
Thank you so much, Professor. Yeah, I mean, probably, yeah, of course. I think each analysis that our panel shares with us kind of hits to the root causes, and that's what we want to tease out. Sure, that's it. But yeah, definitely, there's a large number of people that on both sides who have their own fixed views and their own world views. That is the challenge now. Thank you so much, Professor. And in the next rounds, we look forward to kind of peeling with you some of these nuances and where the healing of America could, progress towards the cleavages if we can reduce or come together. Thank you so much. May I now invite Professor Srinivas Parinandi from now the University of Colorado. Thank you. For your opening comments, please. You're on mute, sir. Professor Parinandi. Yeah, you're on mute.
First, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. I sort of second what both of the other speakers have said. I think it is important to celebrate a transition and to celebrate the sort of momentous nature of this transition specifically, because of sort of a barrier that's been broken in terms of reaching the vice presidency. In terms of policy moving forward, I think that the biggest goal is going to be to get the coronavirus pandemic under control, right? There are new variants of the virus that are quicker, and in some studies, I think are showing potentially more lethal. There has been a lot of pushback on the federal government's handling, dating back from previous administration as well, but there's been some pushback on the federal government's handling of the COVID pandemic and the distribution of vaccines. And so logistically, those are going to be challenges. On top of that, there's another challenge in terms of working with the Congress. The new administration has a razor thin majority in the Senate and a small majority in the House. And so that is going to create some challenges in terms of trying to appear bipartisan. With respect to Professor Hershey's comments about sort of increased polarization in the United States, it is the case really that sort of hyperpolarization has created a situation where people really are not speaking to each other across the party divides. And so I wonder whether there's going to be a lot of legitimacy on the other side, specifically on the Republican side, for what the new administration is trying to do. And so creating that sense of, I know that President Biden is talking a lot about unity, but creating that sense of unity and legitimacy amongst sort of voters, amongst policymakers in Congress, et cetera, across the parties is going to be much harder in practice than simply talking about it. And I think that's going to be the real challenge moving forward.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. No, absolutely. That really is a challenge, the divide and the worldviews just set in alternate visions, whatever it be, or perspectives. Now, one of the round questions is, of course, I really want to tease out what could be, the tangible steps which could be taken to bridge this divide, which we all understand is going to be very, very difficult. Can there be some tangible steps? So that be one step I'll come to. But before that, I want you to take advantage of the fact that we have a mix of practitioners and scholars to ask a question. And this is the second round question now. See, the two-party political system of the United States, the idea was or is that each party will have, a variety of views under its umbrella, right? And they will more coalesce or coagulate towards the middle of that particular party. Similarly for the other party. And in the process, what emerges would be an interlocking of the cleavages, so to say, so that, everything is kind of combined, but within the umbrella, the differences are reconciled. It seems in the present case, to some extent, with the Republican Party, one component of the party has really taken over the middle of the party, so to say. Do you see, or what are your thoughts on this? And this could apply for both on the Democrats and the Republican side, because on the Democrat side also, yes, there would be some elements which are on one end extremes, but probably they are much lesser, and they've been kind of brought into the inside the umbrella, whereas the Republican Party seems to have capitulated the other way around. So what do you see, ahead on this two-party perspective, Commissioner?
Thank you very much. The Democratic Party has its own challenges, like the Republican Party has challenges, and President Biden has to be a real balance artist. He has to make sure that his own party, which is the Democratic Party, you have progressives who may be pulling the party to the left, and so he needs to bring them to the middle, because it's like this, and Rome was not built in overnight, so it took a long time. So we need to become progressive. We need to lay out a path how to get there. And so I think that's one of the challenges. And as Professor Parinandy said, that it's a thin majority, both in the House as well as the Senate. The challenges are that how do you maneuver through that? I think you got to go back to President Lyndon Johnson, who knew how to negotiate, and he was able to get through a lot of legislation. So we could take a page out of his book and learn how to do that. I think President Biden, as a U.S. Senator, he has tremendous experience and working with across the aisle, and he right now he has to rise up to the challenge and bring that together. And it's just like, when you lose, you have to lose gracefully, and when you win, also have to win gracefully. So you cannot be living in the past. You should be thinking about looking to the future. And when you talk about unity, you want to bring the people together, and you have to throw an olive branch. Sometimes, people say, look, I have the majority, why do I need to talk to the minority? Then how are you going to get the unity? So you need to figure out a way how to not losing your power as the majority, at the same time reaching out to the minority party and bring them together to have an agenda. I think everybody surrounds around the flag. United States flag is so sacred. United States Constitution is so important and so strong, and so we will be able to corral around the United States Constitution and the United States flag. I think that's what we should be focusing on. And yes, issues are there. There's going to be division of opinions on how to handle the immigration, how to handle the healthcare, how to handle the economy, and all those things. But I think the underlying message is that if President Biden's message of unity, he needs to figure out how to throw an olive branch and bring the other party closer. And he and the Senate leader McConnell have long working relationships. So if anybody can do it, it's President Biden.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Absolutely. I mean, your thoughts are, of course, I mean, each panelist's perspective is very valuable to us and to our listeners. Folks, whosoever is watching this, please, right now on the Facebook page of the US India Political Action Committee and the Imaginary Institute, I can see several folks are watching by, but nobody is putting in a comment. Perhaps you're thinking it's a recorded video that is playing. No, folks, if you're watching this video right now, it's a live show. So if you put in your questions, we will put up your questions to our panel, and you will get a live feedback from the panel. Thank you so much, Commissioner Upendra. Now, may I come with the same question overarching to Professor Marjorie Hershey? Professor, my point or the question overall was that the two-party political system of the US, right? The notion being that a two-party system would bring about, some form of, if not consensus, but negotiation and coming together, and there'll be more or less a middle path by either party, whichever be it there, right? And also juxtapose it with, there's some talks which I don't know, but I'm just putting it out, that President Trump may float his own party, or let's say Ross Perot once upon a time had his own party, right? So do you see the two-party political system in the US, uh, of course, enduring, but do you see any green shoots of something like that which may necessitate some other parties or political groups arising and getting serious play into the democracy? Professor Marjorie Hershey,
Thank
please, if
you.
you can.
That Americans don't, that two-party politics is not normal in a democracy. Are multi-party systems. We are among the very few democracies in the world that has a true two-party system. And it's not by accident. And as a result, it will be difficult for us to change that system into a system with a minor party of some kind, including a Trumpian party system we have, that the way we count the votes with plurality system member districts means that it's very difficult for any party but the two major parties to be able to win a victory in an election. So the fact that Mr. Third Party, if in fact he would really is kind of irrelevant. Lots of people have tried to start a third party in American politics. Even the fact that we call it a third party is telling. I mean, in India and in many other nations, the third major party. It's not a party that would be coming in opposition to the major parties. Two-party politics can, in fact, be very divisive. It doesn't have to be. Half a century ago, the Democratic and Republican parties had considerable overlap in their viewpoints. There were conservative Democrats, largely Southerners, and they're liberal. That's changed for a variety of reasons. And so we have not just a two-party system, but two very separate parties now. Anything, the Republican Party has been acting more like a party in a multi-party system, more like a smaller party. The Republican Party has moved to the right-wing extreme to a greater extent recently than the Democrats have moved to the left wing. There are reasons for that. One of them is the ability to gerrymander congressional districts, at least in the House of Representatives. That's led to Republicans being more right than Democrats are left wing. But the result is that it adds a lot of complexity to President Biden's ability to generate a consensus. Given the fact that he has a very almost vanishing small majority in the Senate, he's going to have to be perhaps more moderate than many Democrats would.
Thank you so much, Professor. Your sound was dropping off or waxing waning. I don't know if it's at my end or your end, but in between some portions of your talk, at least I missed. I hope that it's only something at my end. Our other viewers and panelists were able to capture it, because this was a very important, point that you were highlighting, and we really would love to go deeper into this particular topic. Thank you so much, Professor, for your thoughts. May I now come to Professor Srinivas Parinandi with the same question, the two-party system, and from what you heard of Professor Marjorie Hershey's analysis perspective, when she was saying that the US is one of the very, very few countries with only a two-party democracy, right? Whereas democracies are multi-party. So that's the tension I want to play out or understand from you, for the sake of our viewers and for ourselves also, with your thoughts. And folks, whoever is watching it on Facebook or LinkedIn, please keep watching. Put in your comments, put in your likes, questions, and we'd love to take up your questions up with our panel. Please, Professor Srinivas. You're muted.
Thank you. To follow up on Professor Hershey's comments, there are structural reasons why the United States has predominantly featured two dominant parties. I think what she was talking about was something that's commonly known as Duverger's law, which is that when you have plurality voting and single member districts, there tends to be a movement towards two parties. And the creation of that two-party system is also usually commensurate with strategic voting on the part of everyday voters. So they tend to vote for not necessarily what their most preferred choice is, but they tend to vote for the choice that is going to be closest to their preferences, but also have the highest likelihood of gaining representation. Besides that, there are structural impediments. You can use the phrase impediments if you think this is a bad thing. You can use the phrase safeguards if you think this is a good thing. There are structural impediments or safeguards that have tended to sort of give the Republican Party more institutional power currently, in spite of their smaller number of voters, right? So one of those safeguards that Professor Hershey talked about has been sort of the success that Republicans have had at the state level in terms of winning state legislative races and then utilizing those wins to control the redistricting process. And they just won again quite well in state races in the most recent election. So they're going to control the majority of redistricting processes moving forward after the 2020 census. On top of that, the Senate historically, the United States historically is a repository of sort of smaller state interests. It was deliberately set up in that way so that the legislature would not sort of represent more larger, more populous states and underrepresent smaller ones. And so the Senate was sort of a compromise to the smaller states at the founding of the country. Currently, the Republican Party in its current manifestation is more catered to more rural states, states that might be lower in population, states that tend to be dominated by resource extraction in terms of their economic activity, rather than sort of like big tech or something that like that. And so the Republican Party has a greater advantage in the Senate because so many more of the smaller states that are dominated by resource extraction or farming gain representation in the Senate. And so moving forward, I don't think that third parties are really going to be much of a part of the solution, barring any structural change in the way that the United States conducts elections. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. There are other sorts of reasons as to why the current Republican coalition is more homogenous than the Democratic coalition. For example, the Democratic coalition caters to lots of disparate groups that may not necessarily sort of respond to the same message. And so that tends to mean that the Democrats have to have a broader message, whereas the Republicans, because their groups are more homogenous across a wide variety of different factors, the Republicans can win where they do win with a more narrow message. So really, I think the answer might be more behavioral in nature in terms of finding ways to broaden the Republican message and solve the polarization issue between the two parties rather than a structural solution, which I think is highly unlikely.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, that's been a refrain of perspective that the Republican side, bottom line, they can have some very core, simple messages: low taxes, less government. I think that's enough, right? Whereas on the Democrat side, you have so many different, causes. And so there is not one meta narrative which the Democrat side or two or three essential meta narratives which the liberal Democrat side can come up, whereas Republican side can come up with these two, three meta narratives: small government, low taxes. Others points may come later. Thank you so much, Professor Srinivas. Now, moving to the third round, I'll come to you again, of course, Commissioner Upendra Chivukula. What do you see happening in the next 100 days? How much of the ambitious agenda, whatever the agenda of Joe Biden, and of course, it's kind of juxtaposed and in context of the impeachment or the trial in the Senate of ex-President Trump. So, what do you see happening in the next 100 days for the benefit of our viewers?
I think both the House and the Senate are going to be distracted, and President Biden will, while his message, he's trying to make his message of unity resonate. And at the one time, there is impeachment trial. Trial is going on in the Senate. It maybe starts in a couple of weeks. So definitely, the trial, I don't know whether it'll take 1 week or maybe 2 weeks. It takes away into his 100 days. And what I see is that the executive orders he has already signed in terms of immigration, creating a path to immigration for undocumented immigrants, and trying to address the COVID issue, which is $1.9 trillion stimulus, and which is going to be require, cooperation from the Republican Party. And so I think joining the Paris Climate Accord, I think that was a great thing for the environmentalists and the environmental policy. But I think the message that President Biden has to really learn from the last 4 years in that how the previous president won the election. He was able to, he looked at it, America is not the East Coast or the West Coast. He looked at the middle America, and people who are struggling, who have not gotten a pay raise in many years. And so he was able to appeal to those people. I think that problem is not solved yet, because on the contrary, because of the COVID situation, that situation is aggravated because people don't have jobs and small businesses have closed. And so what he needs to do is come up with some kind of a program, apprenticeship program, train the people, because there is a movement to bring manufacturing back to the United States. And I think we need to have the skill set that needed. So we need to provide the necessary skills and focus on education of those people who are left behind, not only in the cities, but also in the rural America. I think that's where he has to focus, and that's where he's going to get a lot of the support from the other party.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Upendra, for your thoughts. May I now invite Professor Marjorie Hershey for your thoughts on what do you see happening in the next 100 days, given this whole mix of various vectors which is playing out in American politics? Professor Hershey?
Let me tell you, it's been difficult to follow, although I'm sure that my colleague Srinivas will be able to make the points that I would make much more clear way. I think that the next 100 days, the key will be the United States Senate. And the president of the Senate will much difficulty passing President Biden's initiatives. I think that the leader, Nancy House, she knows how to use it. Her Democratic majority, her. The challenge will be getting the Democrats in the Senate to be cohesive enough so that they can follow through and to deal with Republicans. The Republican Party has the ability to filibuster virtually any substantive piece of legislation. Senator McConnell wants a guarantee
Professor,
Democratic majority would eliminate a major source of power for the Republicans in the Senate.
thank you so much, Professor. Professor, I'm not sure if it's at my end, but your internet seems to be, waxing and waning. Could you please check your internet connectivity, if I may request you, please? Thank you so much, and we'll come back and yeah, please complete. I just wanted to, share that feedback with you, please, Professor.
Yes, I'm having the same problems that you are, and I'm not quite sure how to solve it other than to suggest I'm sure my colleague from Colorado able to at least as effectively as I can. So perhaps he ought to carry the burden of the conversation from here.
Yeah, if you have earbuds, maybe, Professor, you may try to use it. It may help.
It's okay. May I move on to Professor Srinivas? Professor Marjorie will come back. Yeah, please.
Okay, so the question is what the president is going to do in the next 100 days.
Yeah.
Okay, so I concur with what Professor Hershey said. I think that one of the great challenges is going to be controlling the use of, or not controlling, but trying to minimize the use of the filibuster in the Senate to try to slow down major policymaking initiatives by the Biden administration. Another challenge that I think tends to get overlooked is the challenge of getting the Biden appointees confirmed. Lots of Republican senators have taken umbrage with some of the choices, and I think that the previous majority leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, in the previous Democratic administration of Barack Obama, Mitch McConnell, I think, realized that sort of a scorched earth policy was quite useful for the Republican party within the Senate. And so I expect some of those same tactics in terms of trying to slow down appointments, trying to slow down key staffing, analogous with slowing down the policy agenda specifically, will be utilized again. Obviously, the Republicans are in the minority, but again, they have the use of the filibuster and other delay tactics to try to throw mud in terms of the ability of the Democrats to pass their agenda and staff the administration.
Thank you so much, Professor Srinivas. I'm sorry, Professor Madhuri Hershey, her internet has been giving problems, or maybe hopefully she's back, and we will definitely hear from her.
Yes,
Professor,
I am.
Oh, that is so awesome, your voice now. Thank you, please, Professor. So, yeah, great. So, Professor Hershey, and thank you, Commissioner Upendra, for your suggestion. I think the earbuds help. So, Professor Hershey, if you can, kind of summarize what you were saying previously, because we could not hear you fully. It was choppy. So, if you'll pardon us, if you could kindly share a quick, recap summary of your views of the 100 days of Biden presidency.
I'd be happy to. I'm afraid that this isn't a perfect solution, but I will do my best. I think that the big challenge is going to be the United States Senate. And the key figure, of course, is going to be the Vice President, Kamala Harris, who is the president of the Senate. The House of Representatives is a much more centrally controlled body than the Senate is. It has to be because it's so much larger. And the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has a lot more authority than Vice President Harris does to control what happens in the House of Representatives. And she's also obviously very familiar with how to exercise that control. The challenge is going to be, as my colleague says, in the Senate, the Republicans have enough of a membership to filibuster any initiatives that President Biden offers. That means basically talk it to death rather than let it get a vote one way or another. The Republicans are making a very strong effort in the Senate right now to maintain the power of the filibuster. The filibuster has been eroded in the last decade. It is now available only for substantive legislation, but that means that the Republicans in the Senate, who are the minority, can often require a 60-vote majority for the Democrats to pass any piece of legislation, and the Democrats have no hope of getting that 60-vote majority. What the Republicans are doing now in the Senate is to say, we need to make sure we keep that filibuster. And what we have to bargain with is our ability to schedule when we discuss the impeachment, the conviction of President Trump. The Democrats are tempted to eliminate the filibuster, and they could potentially do so. How that particular battle works out is going to make a huge difference in terms of how much of President Biden's initiatives get passed.
Thank you so much, Professor Hershey. Your sounds were absolutely clear, and thank you so much. Okay, yes, we do have somebody. Yeah, yeah. Steve Rao is asking one of the audiences. Hello, US Impact. How can we get immigration reform passed? Skilled immigration. Hello, Upendra. This is Mayor Pro Tem Councilman Steve Rao, Morrisville, North Carolina. Thank you, Steve, so much for coming by, watching by, and for your comment. We once again invite any audiences to please give in your thoughts and questions, and we'll come back to it. Before I move to Commissioner Upendra, I think Professor Srinivas, you were raising a hand. If you have a quick, few bites to
Yeah,
share.
yeah. This was just a rejoinder to the last comment. I I didn't mention in my answer that the filibuster was eliminated by almost a decade ago for executive appointments and still exists for policy related issues in the Senate. However, the point is still the case that in the first 100 days, you're going to have policy agendas competing for the same space with appointing the Biden administration or filling appointments for the Biden administration, competing with the same space of the Trump impeachment case. And so all of that is going to be a lot to handle for the new Congress as well as the new presidential administration.
Sure. Thank you so much, Professor Srinivas. We now move into the next round, a quick round again, more of political analysis and all. And I will lead this off, any perspective you want to share, but also taking a cue from the question comment from Steve Rao, who was watching the show, asking how can we get the immigration reform passed on skilled immigration. And Commissioner Upendra, he is sending you a hello, saying, Upendra, this is Councilman Steve Rao.
Yeah.
So, Commissioner, your thoughts on immigration reform, how can it be passed, or anything else on politics? The next round will be again on healing of America and then a closing round. So, this
Yeah.
round we can still go deeper into nuances, whichever way you want to analyze and share. Sir,
Uh,
yours.
Thank you very much, Councilman Steve Rao, Mayor Pro Temp, and thank you for that hello. And again, as the professors alluded, that immigration reform is a major legislation, and so I think it requires both the parties to come together. And I think, but in this case, in the case of highly skilled, I think the Republicans are more amenable to bringing the highly skilled immigration reform, and so I think Senator Durbin has been working with Senator Mike Lee on in that particular issue, and I think it should happen. I don't say it's going to happen in the 100 days because of there are so many issues that are distracting Congress as well as the administration. So it will be happening sometime this year. And in general, I think Democratic agenda has been trying to get this legislation for creating a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. I think that may also I don't know whether that may throw a curveball or a wrench into this immigration process, but I hope that it's immigration reform. You're not going to get groundbreaking in immigration reform. You're going to have step by step, and you'll have incremental reform happening over the next 4 years.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Meanwhile, Steve was sharing that he has been running 8 miles since the morning, so that's why he got late in joining the Facebook Live. Thank you, Steve. Well, you caught up with us, sir. Thank you. Okay. Now, may I carry the same question at the context of Professor Hershey? Of course, immigration reform and any other nuances of politics or agenda setting that you see, not only in the 100 days, but let's say in the next 1 year of the Biden administration and within American politics. Professor, yours.
Thank you. I think that the Republican Party is the key here. We find in opinion polls that the majority of Americans are comfortable with the idea of immigration reform and comfortable with the idea of a path to citizenship. So why hasn't it happened? Typically, when we see these kinds of blockages in American politics, politics. They arise as a result of some organized group that feels very strongly, whereas the majority of public opinion, although it may be in favor of a policy, that policy is not necessarily at the top of its list. And that is certainly the case with immigration reform. There are parts of the Republican Party that have favored immigration reform for a very long time. This is a part of the party, however, that has not been in the ascendancy since President Trump came into office. President Trump has been a major figure defining immigration not in terms of high-skilled immigrants, but in terms of lower-skilled immigrants who he would claim were taking the jobs of Americans and causing various law enforcement problems. That was really a distortion of the issue of immigration. But once an issue has been defined in a certain way, you have to work hard to redefine it. And I think that the backers of immigration reform are going to have to move away from the definition that the evangelical fundamentalist part of the Republican Party has pushed for a long time, that this means only being overrun by farm workers, rather than that immigration is a multifaceted issue, that many businesses and industries benefit a great deal from high-skilled immigrants, and so does the economy. So this is going to take a bit of a sales job by the people who favor immigration reform to let many Americans know that the image of competing farm workers dashing over the Mexican border is not the only aspect of immigration that they need to be thinking about.
Wow, Professor, that's a very interesting, insight, I would say. I mean, for me, of course, also. A couple of thoughts came to my mind while you were talking. So if I think back, I think immigration originally was the Bracero program, which started, the origins of the H1 are somewhere there, right? One. And secondly, as you say, that it's partly an image problem also, that how is immigration defined, or what is the context or the imagery of immigration. So I think that's a very, very profound point you made, Professor. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm sure that our listeners, our viewers, and especially us in the Indian American community, or even wider community who is watching this discussion and debate, I think there's a beautiful takeaway for us to kind of, look at. Thank you so much for your analysis. May I now come to Professor Srinivas? The same question, yours.
Yeah, I think also in terms of immigration, besides the way that it has been framed, really since Trump became the leader of the Republican Party, besides the way that immigration has been framed, there are also sort of logistical issues in terms of getting immigration passed, right? So a lot of politicians, especially speaking to sort of the structural advantages that we were talking about earlier in terms of smaller states, a lot of the politicians are more worried about primary challenges than they are general election challenges. And there's this famous book written in the 1970s by a political scientist named David Mayhew that said that the goal of all legislators and policymakers is to gain re-election. It doesn't mean that's the only thing they do, but it's a huge part of what they do and informs everything they do. What that basically means is that a lot of Republicans who may even be sympathetic to immigration reform personally, they're going to be looking at their 2022 Senate elections, and they're going to be looking at what's going on right now with Liz Cheney, for example, where she's getting sort of her own leadership position threatened. And they're going to not want to sort of embrace this if they think that's going to hurt their re-election chances. I should also add that it's not just the Republicans that are looking at this. I can look at a Democrat like Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a state that was reliably Democratic for the better part of 80 years, until the Trump version of sort of economic nationalism combined with some aspects of populism sort of displaced the Democratic Party in that state. he's not going to be supportive of this necessarily. And so it's important to understand that different parts of the Democratic coalition, as well as the Republican coalition, may not be receptive to immigration reform in practice, even if they are receptive personally.
Thank you so much, Professor Srinivas. I think it's getting
Good point.
to be a very interesting discussion, layers upon layers. And of course, maybe we could ask Commissioner Upendra the challenges of elected office. The 2 years or 4 years, whatever is the day you get elected, you're trying to work on your re-election campaign, fundraising, and all of that. It's an endless cycle, within the US political system, but so be it. Now, this round actually is, I am now going to move away from politics. I'm going to move towards an idea of idealism or foolish. As I think President Biden the other day said that when he was talking about unity, he said maybe it's a foolish fantasy, but that's what we need to have. So this is a theoretical, but a specific aspect on which, in fact, I as a moderator and we as a platform, we do not much bring our points into the conversation. We much rather welcome our panel's discussions, which our folks listen. But there's one little thing we want to discuss with you in this panel. This is one perspective that we feel for the quote unquote healing of America as a pragmatic aspect in the long term lies in children education. Because see, end of the day, the adults who are a result of some kind, whatever our total programming of the mind, values, world belief systems, etc., etc. Right. So that's the adult of tomorrow. If emphasis is placed more in the education school system in the United States across schools on, well, big philosophy, live and let live, encompasses compassion, empathy, etc., etc. There are campaigns which go as kindness is cool, right? I would say kindness is the new cool, if it can be, if it can become fashionable with the kids, because that's what they're about. Once upon a time, smoking was cool, so people would smoke. To teenagers would smoke and be cool. So if somewhere that aspect can be slowly into our school systems for the children, with two advantages. One, it will reduce bullying in the schools right now, right? Because there's a lot of bullying going on in the schools also, right? And secondly, when these kids grow up, when they've been exposed in a fun way to ideas or curriculum of compassion, kindness, live and let live. So when they grow up as adults, maybe less number of them would be veering towards extremism of any sorts, and including violence. So that being said, so this round will be a quick fire question or your views on this. So what about a curriculum of a public movement in the US as a tangible, see, healing of America, how will it happen? It's a tough thing. I don't know. Could this be one of the tangible aspects in the healing of America, that in the school curriculum from K through 12, a curriculum, fun, funky, smartly designed, taught to the children? Commissioner
Yeah, I
Upendra?
think no, I think it's a bigger problem. Inequity, income inequality is a major issue. I think that translates right into the education. United States Constitution is based on smaller government, lower taxes, and ownership. Where is the ownership? When you look at, we live in a capitalistic society in America where 50% of the people own zero capital. And I think that has to be addressed. And, I have my friend, a Republican friend, I wrote a book on third way, trying to address that issue. We raised that this type of, when we had Occupy Wall Street, then we had the Black Lives Matter, all those things we predicted in that book. Of course, we were not famous, so we didn't get anywhere. But I tried to introduce legislation in the state legislature. But I think the fundamental fabric of the United States is that a lot of these children are raised by single mothers and single one parent family. They're coming and they're missing out a lot of opportunity. No matter what you do with the curriculum. For example, when in the state of New Jersey, when the schools went virtual, and they found that the children don't have iPads or computers, and they didn't have access to broadband. And so I think rural America has similar challenges in terms of broadband services and all. You require high speed, whether it's a Zoom or whatever the video conferencing that you are using. So I think that is a bigger challenge. To answer your question about the curriculum, definitely, it's a very divisive thing, curriculum also. So the Democrats are going to be pushing for very progressive ideas, whether they want to introduce LGBTQ or whatever the other issue they're going to bring in. And the Republican side, they want to bring more about the religious aspect of it, how they talk about whether it's evolution or creation. So education is not an easy challenge. Then you have the public school system versus the charter schools, and then you have the schools that are privately funded through Catholic schools and all that. I think so. Education is a very divisive issue, and curriculum, I don't know whether that's where I would start with. I think the good old greenback, the dollar, is going to be the unifier of America.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. That's such interesting points. I would love to set up a discussion separately with any one of you if you're interested in this. But yeah, apart from the education point, yes, absolutely. The inequities, the concentration of wealth which is happening in this world today, irrespective of America, it's happening worldwide. Conglomerates, the wealthy are getting wealthier by enormous numbers and amounts, and whichever other segments you may say are being are losing out, and this is a huge one out there which you identify. Absolutely. Second, yes, the idea curriculum is a very sensitive subject. I completely hear you, sir. For any dispensation, be it the Democrat, Republican, religion, whichever way, to touch. But in some ways, we are running a campaign. I just want to share with you, wherein we are saying that whichever way, do whatever, have a curriculum of some sorts of live and let live philosophy introduced, because that's the only way ahead. Otherwise, we are heading for multiple things. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Now, may I invite Professor Hershey, quick feedback, comments on this particular aspect. We understand the sensitivity of the curriculum, but how else could fundamentally, in the future, our societies could be less divided, less divisive?
That's a wonderful and terribly difficult question. And I would echo a lot of what the commissioner said. Public schools are highly politicized. Most states run their schools through a public school commission that is very, very often elected. And that poses the same problems that we've seen with the movement toward the far right in the Republican Party more generally. There have been a lot of school commissions that have been essentially captured by fundamentalist groups that want certain things taught and don't want other things taught. I think there has been a fair amount of movement toward anti-bullying programs in the school, which I'm very much in favor of, since half of my grandchildren are people of color. I think, however, that we need to make a connection between those anti-bullying programs on the one hand and acceptance of groups on the other at the national level. It's, being able to get along with the person in the desk next to you is probably a lot easier than it is to refrain from demonizing and symbolizing groups that you can't see. And very briefly, I think that that's a good reason for us to suggest people getting involved at the local level. We've seen a tremendous focus on national politics in public life, and that's the level at which demonization really occurs, because it's so much easier to point the finger in a negative way at people who you aren't going to see day to day, to people who aren't going to help you shovel your walk or say hello to you on the street. So a further emphasis on involvement at the local level, I think, would do a lot toward unity.
Thank you so much, Professor. And yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think, for a lot of folks who go into the political space, one of the first areas they cut their teeth is running for school board elections, right? So politics starts there in the school boards when you are looking to, become a political or a leader in public service or public affairs. But very much noted to your point, because this campaign is something on which we are working right now, and we are trying to figure out how to best kind of take it or forward, etc. One of the things we are doing is that we're encouraging children of the Indian American community and anyone to write a letter to the White House, to President Joe Biden, and say that within the 100 days, in fact, we were trying to get it in his inaugural address, that somewhere he would use the term, let us all live and let live. But fair enough. So we are pushing for that in the next 100 days. The idea is that, I mean, it's, movements like these and getting whatever we can to, the aspect of coexistence. But what you said, that demonizing someone you don't know in your proximity is easier than someone who's sitting in the desk right next to you or your co-worker. Thank you, Professor. May I now come to Professor Srinivas quickly on this, and then after this, we have a closing round of your eminent views of each panelist. Professor Parinamdi.
So I'm going to sort of say similar things to what the other two panelists have said. First, I'm skeptical about, curricular changes are obviously important, but survey after survey is now demonstrating that Americans have very low levels of institutional trust, as well as trust of authority. This is a problem, but at the same time, if the solution comes from an institution and a source of authority with which where people don't trust that institution or that authority, then one questions whether that solution is really going to be successful. And so what that means is that the message of more unity and the message of more tolerance has to be something that is organic and almost spreading through networks that people trust. And those networks might be sort of more local in nature. Additionally to that, I think another important point is that if you look at work and research on sort of civic society, Americans' involvement in civic associations is at very low levels compared to historical levels of civic involvement. So these can be things like school boards, which have gotten a lot of mention here, or they could be like bowling leagues, baseball, softball leagues, like the Elks Lodge, these sorts of things, and other things as well. The important thing about being in civic associations is that they can lead to like learning how to get along with other people and learning to tolerate differences. And so I think that another solution, besides having a local message, has to also be finding ways to increase involvement in sort of civic associations or informal associations of any kind, to just get people to recognize other people and learn to live with other people.
Thank you so much, Professor Jones. Absolutely, I mean, much appreciated. And your each panelist, comments on this particular round are actually very valuable, because this is something we are trying to translate into, some action or some momentum or movement to whatever extent we can. Sure, I mean, multiple things, but this is one little thing. And as I mentioned, right now, what we are doing is we are encouraging children in the age group of 10 to 20 to write to their local congressmen, write to their local senators, and say that, you know what, I want a resolution in the House of Representatives which says that American dream, etc., life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and all, etc., and live and let live amongst humankind and between human and environment, mother nature, and other sentient beings, right? So we are trying to kind of, push some kids or whoever is interested. We're asking parents if their children would be interested to at least let some voices reach these lawmakers. Thank you so much for your wonderful insightful comments. Now we come to the closing round of this discussion. In this round, once again, it's open-ended. Your closing thoughts, suggestions, suggestions for what can be done, should not be done, your speculation, your prophecy, anything, welcome. Commissioner, starting with you, sir.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank USINPAC and Image India Institute for this opportunity to share my thoughts. And I think it is important that to recognize that all politics is local. And if you are trying to get children to get engaged, you got to get engaged with the local councils and counties and states before going to Washington. I think, I mean, I'm not saying you should not do that. You should do both in parallel. I am very optimistic about Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration, and that there are going to be a lot of great things are going to be happening. And only my advice would be to don't look back, look forward. And hope is looking forward, not looking backwards. And hopelessness is what when you look back. And so we need to focus on the future, future of our nation, future of our children, most importantly. And I think, as Mahatma Gandhi once said, that the character of the nation is judged by how they treat their children. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And I just can't hold myself back a little. As you said, Gandhi, uh, who was this poet? Wordsworth or someone? The child is the father of man, right? What the child learns today is what the adult of tomorrow is, So in that sense, the adult we are today, the child which I was is has given me birth. So thank you so much, Commissioner, for your thoughts and sharing this platform. May I now invite Professor Marjorie Hershey for your closing thoughts, comments, any which way you want to slice or dice, please.
Thank you. What really struck me on Inauguration Day was someone who wasn't there, who I very much wish were there. And that's someone who I think that Indian American organizations ought to spend some time discussing with their constituents. And that is a woman named Shamala Gopalan Harris, Kamala's mother. She worked with my husband in a lab a very long time ago. She was herself an immigrant from India, a terrific researcher on cancer, a remarkable role model for her two daughters and for everyone else in the United States. We are so lucky that she decided to become an immigrant to the United States and to give us the daughter she did. I think if children were to study not just Benjamin Franklin and George Washington, but Shamala Harris as well, that we would do a lot toward bringing people into a better understanding of the necessity of diversity, the values of diversity, and the importance of character in American politics.
That is so deep and profound, and thank you so much for highlighting this. Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm sure that among the Indian American community, also people are appreciating, of course, Kamala Harris and what she's done, and also, like, yeah, you're right in a sense that the mother is somewhere, in the nebulous, vague backgrounds. So when you say that, to study her, she was a researcher, a scientist. She participated in the 60s, the civil rights movements and all. So she must have been really, I mean, as Kamala Harris, Vice President, says that, of course, about her mom. But I think that's a very, very interesting point you make that, the struggles, the ideals, all that which a person goes through and imbibes and leaves a family or the children, because once again, the child is the father of man. So what Kamala Harris is today as vice president, she is only because what she was as a child and what ideas she gained as a child and perspectives that she gained as a child. That's what we'll say, right? So thank you so much, Professor, once again. And maybe this will be another, there are several takeaways, it seems, which are coming from this conversation with Commissioner Upendra, Professor Srinivas, and Professor Marjorie. Thank you so much. This is actually this was an interesting, mix between practitioners and scholars. And I think we've really, in some senses, achieved our objective of gaining, learning so much between us. And we'll be sharing this YouTube video on our website and amongst friends and circles. So I hope the more, the conversation, the message spreads, the more, some ripples may be created, who knows where. Thank you so much, Professor Hershey. May I now invite Professor Srinivas for your concluding comments, please.
I think that it's really important to understand that we came very close, I think, and the date that I want to hit on is January 6th. And I know this is partially probably because I'm more pessimistic in nature, but also because democracy is not something that just happens. And sort of like, we're not just passive non-participants in this exercise. It is really like a muscle. It has to be used. And it has to be used continuously in order to stay relevant. And I think that we came very close to seeing major threats to our democratic experiment that really is quite unique. I mean, it's not a perfect experiment. It still is imperfect in many ways, but it was revolutionary in the 1770s and 1780s and still is revolutionary today. And I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to appreciate and work towards, in a very active way, the maintenance of our democracy. Part of that includes celebrating our diversity. And we have lots to celebrate about, and we also have lots to work on. I think part of that also includes sort of communicating with those amongst us who are a little bit more fearful of changes, to understand that the changes are not going to displace anyone. The changes are not going to make anyone sort of unwelcome. What we're talking about is sort of, I think, through our diversity and through our richness as a nation, I think what we're talking about is making opportunity and making the pie bigger for everyone. It's not a zero-sum game. It's an experiment that tries to make life better and richer for all of us. And I think communicating that is going to be the big challenge and potentially the big reward moving forward.
Well, absolutely, Professor. As you said, democracy, and really, yes, what we saw on January 6th brought us, I mean, the world was watching, and America itself was watching, and the world was also watching. It came pretty close to a precipice. Things could have gone one way or the other. Who knows, what tangent things could have gone. So it's fragile. I think speaker after speaker, I think even President Biden in his inauguration speech also mentioned something to this effect, that democracy is something every day we have to keep working towards. But it also reminds me that, in international affairs, actually, the concept of the mirror images, that for each side, the other is the evil, right? So here, what we've gotten in the United States, perhaps getting embedded more and more, is that the other side is the evil. If for the Democrats, progressives, the Republican sides are anarchy, authoritarian, and Trump colored, for example, right? And to be fearful of. Similarly, on the other side, the mirror image is that this is communism, this is socialism. They're gonna take away our guns, tax us to death.
Lost the host. The miracles of technology.
Well, if we had to do that, this is the time.
Right.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much to have met both of you and all of you in that. And
It's the pleasure is ours.
thank you. I think we may have to. How do we end it? How do you end
The
it?
poor thing, he got wiped out altogether.
No, stay tuned. How long?
Way